Jasurandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Bonachari Yamuna Tira Bonachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopi Jana Ballabha Giridhari Jasoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Jasoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Bonachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopi Jana Ballabha Giridhari Jasoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Jasoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Bonachari Yamuna Tira Bonachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jayam Vishnupada Paramahansa Parivrajaka Charja Stotara Sarashi Srimad Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupada Paramahansa Parivrajaka Charja Stotara Sarashi Srimad Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupada Paramahansa Parivrajaka Charja Stotara Sarashi Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaja Ki Jai. Translation. Thereafter, the Lord entered his palaces, which were perfect to the fullest extent. His wives lived in them, and they numbered over 16,000. Om Agena Timirandasya Garananjana Salakaya Chaksurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Karamayam Drati Spaparanti Kam Mukam Karoti Bachalam Pangam Longayate Girim Yatkri Pataraham Bande Shri Guru Dinatarane. In the purport, Prabhupada says that the Lord had 16,108 wives. And in the at the end of the purport, he says, everything being unlimited, it is concisely described here as Sarvakaman. And he also writes that the Lord is unlimited, and therefore his desires are also unlimited. For unlimited, in mathematics we have the infinity sign, which is the kind of a figure 8 rotated at about 45 degrees. But beyond that, we generally don't think of something that's infinite, although the Lord is described as unlimited. Unlimited means infinite. That Vedic knowledge is so deep and so sophisticated that it's not actually comprehensible as a finite thing. Vedic knowledge is very deep and very extensive, much more than people realize. I mean, many people just come to Krishna consciousness because they like the food, they like the hospitality, they like the people, they like it's clean and it's nice. But it's also a very deep philosophy. It's much more than people just chanting on the streets and reading a few books. One of the things that Prabhupada used to repeatedly stress was how important it was for reading books. He said that it was very difficult for him to write books. He would very often wake up very late in the night or early in the morning, say 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, and dictate. He completed the Nectar Devotion in around 1971, and he was very happy he stressed that devotees should read this book repeatedly. It was a book by Rupa Goswami, based on Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And he was very happy. He announced this in Los Angeles in 1972, I think in about August or thereabouts, that he was very happy that he had completed it. And he said that it came to something like 400 pages, but if he had commented on each and every verse, it would have been about 800 or 900 pages, each and every verse of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. It's a very deep philosophy. One of the things that gave Prabhupada a lot of energy was his meditation on the tomb of Rupa Goswami, which in Vrindavan was just outside of the room where he used to take his meals. He would gaze out the little window and at the tomb of Rupa Goswami, which has since then been renovated, and it looks very exquisite now. It's right in the Radha Damodar courtyard. Many of you have probably been there or seen it. And the marble platform on which it is located out of doors is very highly polished and very beautiful. So the philosophy is very intimate, and Prabhupada notes this. But he made it a little bit easier for us to read, because many of the Goswamis wrote books in Bengali or Sanskrit and very hard to understand. Like Sanatana Goswami wrote the Hari Bhakti Vilas, and it's very, very intricate and very detailed and very difficult to understand. But because Prabhupada made it easier to understand, it's available. These books are now like Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. He lectured on this summary study that he wrote several times, and stressed how important it was that it not only be read, but it be read repeatedly, that it be studied, and that there's a new kind of realization in each and every reading of this book and all the books, actually. Prabhupada once told us that every shloka is like a poem, and Rupa Goswami was so vastly intelligent that he even could write some of his writings, read forwards and backwards, and they still have a very important message. So we think that people like Shakespeare and Pushkin and whoever are great poets. Well, maybe they were. Of course, they were in their own languages, but Sanskrit is a very difficult language. It's been said that it takes something like 12 years of 8 hours a day study, 6 days or 7 or 8 days a week, before you can even master the grammar. It's a very difficult language. So Rupa Goswami and his and Sanatana Goswami were experts. And it was said in the School of Oriental and African Studies on the bulletin board, I was there in London at the time, the School of Oriental and African Studies is a division of London University, and they had a campus right near the temple on Berry Place, also very near the Soho Temple, which is also very close to Berry Place. That Jiva Goswami was the greatest philosopher in the world. It was on a little card, 3 inches by 5 inches, or about maybe 7 by whatever that is in centimeters, 10 centimeters, little card. And it was on the bulletin board, and it said that Jiva Goswami, who they were studying, was the greatest philosopher in the world. Greater than, I guess that means even greater philosopher than Socrates and Aristotle. He wrote several hundred verses. And these Prabhupada once told us that we can't really understand the relationship between Radha and Krishna unless we go through the Goswamis. They were not only very learned but very devoted. Raghunath Goswami, who Sita told us a little bit, Sitala told us a little bit about, was not only very learned in the languages and the shastras, but very expert in dealing with mundane currents in the world. There was one incident where his father and uncle were thought to not be paying enough taxes or something, and the local tax collector came to arrest them. But they somehow got wind of this, and they fled before he got there. And the only person left in the house was Raghunath Goswami. So he dealt with these tax collectors in such a brilliant way, and he was a very young man at that time, and probably in his early 20s or late teens. But he talked to them in such a way that they went away satisfied, even though they didn't punish the father and uncle of Raghunath. So he was very expert in dealing. All these Goswamis were very expert. And we read how Sanatana Goswami, because he renounced his ministership, was punished and put in prison by the Nawab, the then ruler of that area. And it's narrated how he escaped. He was very intelligent, because he gave some. It was kind of like a spiritual bribe, we might say, or a backhander, that he convinced the jailer that he could go. He didn't want to do it, and the jailer said, "Well, maybe I can let you go, but then what I do fear is that the Nawab is going to punish me." So he made up this story. He said, "Just tell him this, that Sanatana Goswami had to answer the call of nature, and he went down to the river, and you went with him. And all of a sudden, he jumped into the water, but he had shackles on his 2 feet, and he must have drowned." So that was the way that the jailer was able to escape punishment, because he told that story to the ruler, and he was exonerated as seen as being innocent of allowing Sanatana to escape. So these Goswamis were, like Raghunath and Sanatana, were not only experts in spiritual knowledge, but they were experts in everything, in the ways of the world. They because they had some ministership in the Pathan government. They were very learned and they were very wise in terms of worldly knowledge. So they knew how to do everything, including escaping from jail, which is not an easy thing to do. But in those days, of course, it was easier, I suppose. Anyway, Prabhupada is talking in this chapter about the residents of Dwarka, how they were very pakat and very devoted and very disheartened when Krishna was away, even for the short time he was away. I mean, it's not a short time, but to them it was for many ages, when he went to Kurukshetra and took part in the battle. But they were very, very stricken by Krishna's absence. And Prabhupada goes into a lot of detail here, and the verses go into a lot of detail, explaining what the relationships are between Krishna and his wives, Krishna and his followers, Krishna and his friends, Krishna and his elders and various relatives. They all had to obey certain customs that were not exactly customs, but the behavior of the spiritual world. It's interesting that Prabhupada came to the West not only with the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, but with an entire culture, a way of dress, a way of eating, a way of taking care of the body, and taking care of proper health and all that sort of thing. So there was a whole culture that came with Prabhupada. It wasn't just the philosophy, there was a whole culture. And many of us who have been to India have learned a lot of these Bengali and Hindi words and customs. Like, you don't give people something with your right hand, you give it with your left hand. You always use your right hand, and things like that. And there's a Bengali, I don't know if it's Bengali or Indian, there's a saying that you don't give people anything with odd numbers, or you don't use odd numbers like 1, 3, and 5. You use 2, 4, and 6, and 8, and so on. So these are all the part of some of the customs that we have learned, part of the culture of Krishna consciousness, not necessarily the philosophy, but how we behave, how we act. There was a time when Prabhupada was in India and sometimes he was very heavily criticized by Indian people who saw that the Westerners weren't obeying all the traditions and characteristics and customs of India. There was one incident I remember reading where, I think it was one devotee, I don't want to mention his name, but he was he was giving they were somewhere in India, but he was giving the guests some rasgullas or gulab jamuns with the wrong hand. And Prabhupada was begging his Indian friends to please forgive these people because they don't know everything. And then he lectured many times on how important it was to be Krishna consciousness, much more important than the rituals and everyday kind of customs of his country. And there's some reference to not being properly behaved, how one can fail in Krishna consciousness by not being well behaved. But if one fails, or has what Prabhupada called an accidental fall down in Krishna consciousness, but was very enthusiastic, utsaha nishchaya daryat is stated in the Upadeshamrita. He's very enthusiastic and very patient and very knowledgeable, very determined. If that person doesn't complete the course of Krishna consciousness, become fully mature, and he takes up he gains whatever Krishna consciousness that person engaged in is a permanent asset. So in other words, one can take up in the next life where one leaves off. Yoga kshema bahamyaham. He takes birth in the family of devotees or a very affluent family. So he has an opportunity, he or she, to practice Krishna consciousness fully. There was a time when I may have told about this, how one life member used to come to every week, and one of his customs was that he brought with him another person who became a life member. This went on for several weeks, actually several months. But there was something that this man didn't like about the devotees, what they were doing. He didn't like the way they were dancing, sometimes showing their soles of their feet to the deities. And I was in Prabhupada's room one day when this man came. It was a Sunday, and the room was full of devotees. Probably there were 30 or 40 devotees. It was a very large room, almost as large as this temple room. And this man who had brought all the life members didn't come into the room, but he just stood in the doorway, and and everyone kind of went quiet as soon as he came, because they knew he was very important, had brought a lot of funds into the temple. And he addressed Prabhupada from a distance, and he was probably about 10 meters away from Prabhupada. And he said, "Prabhupada," or Swamiji, I think he called him Prabhupada, we like it when people sit down and play harmonium and tablas quietly and not dance wildly in front of the deity, sometimes doing weird things." And Srila Prabhupada just gazed at him for a few seconds, didn't answer immediately, but just gazed at him, and finally he said, "You cannot control ecstasy." And that was the last we saw of that man. He never came back. He was offended by Prabhupada's comment, which was probably a true comment, but this man was very attached to the ritualistic activity. And like a lot of people in India, when there's a kirtan party in Bombay or Delhi or in any big city, Calcutta, Madras, now Chennai, people would gather in huge numbers, because most of those people, like all people in the world, and not just in India but in the West, they thought that, well, especially in India where Vedic culture is still somewhat alive, but people respected chanting Hare Krishna, but they thought that the ultimate goal was to reach the Brahman platform, or the platform of impersonal realization. And they thought that the chanting Hare Krishna was a very good baby step towards that ultimate goal. And most of the people of the world are, even if those who are theists, they think that God is an entity or a force, but not with a personality who can walk and talk and speak and eat and love and all those things. So the conception that most of the world has of God, even those who are theists, is somewhat limited. It's very limited. We have the concept of rasas, where Krishna or God is not only all powerful, but he can be he can be your friend, he can be your lover, he can be your mother or father. So it's a unique kind of conception of God. And this is what Prabhupada called the science of God. It's not an ordinary thing. Even the great demigods were sometimes amazed at the depth of what Krishna could do. And in the Brahma Mohana Leela, Brahma is testing Krishna when he steals all his calves and young friends, and sees that they have been recreated in the next moment, even though that he's stolen them and kept them to himself. And then he realized that he was underestimating or very wrong about the power of Krishna, about the ultimate infinite power of Krishna. And at one point Prabhupada said that it's just an amazing thing that he had 16,108 wives and made a palace for each one. But in a way it's not amazing, because Prabhupada said that what if he had 16,108 million wives? That would also not be difficult for Krishna, because he's unlimited. He can do anything. So this concept of God is the most detailed and thorough concept of God. But nonetheless, one whose concept of God is God is impersonal is a step. Maybe it's a baby step, but it's a step in the right direction. Even scientists like Einstein and Newton, they were theists. They somehow or other they knew that all the atoms in the universe and every element and every phase of creation had a deeper meaning to it, and that God had all the knowledge, whereas they just had a little portion of it. He was describing Newton sometimes, saying that Isaac Newton had a handful of grains of sand. He said, "What is this knowledge?" He said, "There, something to the effect that there are thousands and millions of these grains of sand on beaches all over the world. So what knowledge do I have?" And so-called Einstein said something like that. Not so-called Einstein, but Albert Einstein, the scientist, said, well, after he died, I remember one newscaster saying that Einstein was noted for saying that, "I want to know not that God created the universe, but how God created the universe. All the rest is detail." I think the actual saying is a little bit more complicated and sophisticated, but that's the essence of it. I want to know how God created the universe. Everything else is detail. So but the deeper knowledge of Krishna is that he can be a lover as well as a judge of right and wrong. And we've seen that in the hands of Narayan there are four devices. Like on these altars, on the Krishna Balaram altar, we see I think it's a chakra, and a club. And on the other altar of Gaur-Nitai, we see on the top, on the roof, there's a lotus and a conch, which are blessings. The lotus and the conch are blessings, whereas the club and the discus or the chakra are punishments. We heard that Krishna can be hard as thunderbolt and soft as a rose. This is the deeper conception that God can be punishment. He can administer punishment, and he can also elevate someone to the highest platform of love and happiness. These are some of the deeper understandings of Krishna. Hard as a thunderbolt, and I think it was Shruti Kirti and Brahmananda who were saying that Prabhupada used some English words that they thought were incorrect, and they looked them up and they were correct. Like he used the word percolate, and he used the word thunderbolt, and it's very interesting that he adopted all these kind of informal words like skyscraper and wildfire, and words that we kind of routinely use, but they're not used very much in that part of the world. But Prabhupada liked them because he was, among many other things, a great poet. He picked up on certain phrases and certain words in a language that was not his first language, although they do speak it in that part of the world, English. But Bengali was his first language. And yet he picked up on all these very colorful and unique expressions that are of North American English very readily. And because he picked up on them and used them so frequently, he became very much endeared to his public. His public were mostly North Americans and Europeans. He sometimes emphasized the verse Nityasiddha Krishna Prema Sajja Kabunai Shravanadi Shuta Chitte Karya Udai. It means that Krishna consciousness is not obtained from an external source, but everyone is born with Krishna consciousness in their heart. Once I calculated that since we're only 5,000 years into a 432,000 year period of Kali Yuga, we've only gone less than 1% of the way through it. Most people are somewhat interested, but even as Kali Yuga progresses, it's said that the people become more and more atheistic. At the beginning and in the middle, maybe there's a fourth of the people are a little bit pious, and 3/4 of the people are impious. And as it reaches to the end, the people, almost everybody, 10% is impious or atheistic. So when we preach Krishna consciousness to people, we can take courage in the fact that approximately 1 out of 5 people are at least theists. Maybe they're impersonalists, but they believe in God. So even though preaching is a bit of a thankless task, there's hope in that 1 out of every 4 people, approximately, is at least theistic and is not of the demonic, impious nature of most of the denizens of Kali Yuga. So there can be hope. I don't know if this was said in class, but apparently there's a ministry of cow protection newly created in India. So there's always hope, and there's a devotee who's running maybe for the President of the United States. So there's always some hope in the fact that Kali Yuga is just, in a sense, just beginning. It seems like it's reached a kind of breaking point, and things couldn't get any worse, but they do get a lot worse, and so there's always some hope. So I think I'll stop here if there's any. Oh, I'm sorry for the incoherence of my talk today, but this is what happens when sleepless nights occur. Yes.
He was studying the German kind of becoming a devotee, and he said your point about studying the scripture, studying the literature in depth, and he said to that German boy, he said, actually you should study each verse for 1 month. And then he put him the question, he said, and how many verses in the Bhagavatam? So the devotee is 18,000. So he says 18,000 times 1 month. How long it will take you to study the Bhagavatam? So the devotee worked it out and said something like 2,000 years. But Prabhupada insisted on that. He said actually you should spend that much time on each verse.
I heard also that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati lectured for almost 2 months on just one verse. 2 months on just I think it was the first verse of the Bhagavatam. And Prabhupada made it a rule that the Bhagavatam should be heard every single day without fail in every temple all over the world. So it's not an ordinary book. It's a book of great depth and poetry, and it's a book that, like Ajita was saying, that you can study each verse time and again, and each reading brings fresh and newer and greater knowledge, even though it's the same words over and over again. It's written in such a way that you get deeper and deeper realizations with each repetition. And Prabhupada is also noted for saying that my only complaint is that you don't read my books. I work so hard to write books for you, and you don't even read them. You just sell them. What good is it if you sell a book to someone and they ask you what's in this book? I said, and what if you say, I don't know. I just sell the books. I don't read them. It's just, and that happens, unfortunately. So books are meant for us to study and read, not to just distribute. I mean, the distributing is important, but they're meant to also be studied. Any other comments? Okay. Huh? Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.